I want to try this a little differently today. I am trying to do this on TikTok Live. I am going to try to do it a little different than I have in the past. I want to see if I can upload a recording of this to my podcast host, and see if that will work that way. I'm hoping it will work that way. So anyway, appreciate you guys coming and joining me here on the TikTok Live. Like I said, I'm just giving this a whirl. This may not end up working, but I'm trying to do my best to incorporate some live stuff into the show. So anyway, if you are following on, if you listen to the podcast through regular means, if you're on a podcast app, I would really appreciate if you hit the follow button, the subscribe button, whatever it may be. If you're watching on YouTube, same thing, hit those subscribe buttons. And if you can rate the show, whatever podcast app you're watching it on, I would really appreciate, or listening to it on, I would really appreciate that. It would help me out a whole lot. A couple of things. I'm on all of the podcast. I'm on all the social media platforms. TikTok, obviously, since I'm doing this on TikTok, doing this on, I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter. That's where I've been for the past 12 years as well. So you can find me on all those places. And if you would follow me, it would help me out a whole lot. So let's go ahead and get into this. Mississippi State had a basketball game last night. My hope was that I could just kind of gloss over that basketball game because they were playing the Long Island University Sharks. And unfortunately, they did not play very well, which has been the case for Mississippi State pretty much the entire season so far. They do move to 6-5. They do get the win, but it's just been kind of the same thing that we've been having, the same problem that we've been having since the season started. The team just does not look like, they're not consistent. They don't look very good. We've got 2 more games before SEC play starts, and your hope of having a decent year so far has really continued to drop. You had a good win against Utah on Saturday, and you were hoping, if you're a Bulldog fan, that you could just take this win and take that win from Saturday and use it to catapult yourself into better play. Unfortunately, that is not the case. And the biggest problem that Mississippi State has right now, I'm going to pull up the stats on my phone, but the biggest problem that Mississippi State has right now is there's just no consistency outside of 2 players. The only 2 players that Mississippi State knows they're going to get something from night in and night out is Josh Hubbard and Jaden Epps. We talked on Monday's show about how maybe Jabari McGee, maybe this was a breakout game for him. He's had some pretty decent games. He's had some good games throughout the course of his early career here as a Mississippi State Bulldog, but unfortunately, he doesn't do anything to capitalize on it. Is basically on last night, he ends up playing 11 minutes, 1 of 5 from the field, 2 points, 2 rebounds, and 1 assist. That's not how you want to follow up one of your best games ever as a collegiate player. So what ends up happening is Jaden Epps and Josh Hubbard end up just carrying this team on their back, especially Josh Hubbard. And that's the way it's been if Mississippi State wants to win, is Josh Hubbard at some point you just have to decide, all right, guys, I'm going to drag you guys across the finish line, and we're going to figure out a way to win this game if it's at all possible. And that's what he did last night. Josh Hubbard goes 11 for 23, 6 of 13 from 3-point range. He has 34 points, 2 rebounds, 4 assists. So a great game from Josh Hubbard. Jaden Epps, again, puts up another really good game. He's been great ever since that first game where he ended up getting, I think, a concussion and not doing very much then. But he goes 34 minutes. He has 20 points, 6 of 13 from the field, 1 of 5 from 3-point range. So that's not great. 4 rebounds, 1 assist. A really good game from him. Those are the 2 that you can kind of count on. But of the 87 points that Mississippi State scored, 54 of them came from those 2 players. The only other player that really contributed significantly is the guy from Serbia, I think is where he's from. I cannot pronounce his name, but Kura, I think is how it is. I'm not 100% positive that's how it's pronounced or not, but he ends up having 12 points, 5 of 6 from the field, 1 of 1 from 3-point range. He missed all of his free throws, if I'm not mistaken, but a pretty solid game from him. So you're happy to see that he played well, but that's not what he necessarily has been doing all season long. That's the problem that Mississippi State has right now, is you get no consistency from anybody else besides Hubbard and besides Epps. Those 2, they're doing great. They're doing a really good job of giving you a consistent performance night in and night out. Josh Hubbard is going to give you 20 plus points in all likelihood. Jaden Epps is probably going to give you anywhere from 15 to 20. And Chris Jans has not been able to figure out who's going to be the best contributor for this team. He can't figure out what a lineup is supposed to, what his lineup needs to be. He can't figure out what his rotations need to be because the players aren't putting consistent performances out on the floor. I've been a critic of Sean Jones this year because I don't think he's done much. But the one thing that Chris Jans knows about Sean Jones, though, he knows what he's going to do. And that's probably the reason why he has not been replaced in the starting lineup, is because even though Sean Jones, again, did not have that great of a game last night, he ended up going for, where did Sean Jones have last night? He had 6 points, 2 of 4 shooting, 2 rebounds, 3 assists. Not a great game, but you kind of know what you're going to get with Sean Jones, and you don't know what you're going to get from everybody else. Maybe Jabari McGee will have another great game. Maybe Brandon Walker will have another great game. At least this time around, Quincy Ballard had 8 points and 10 rebounds. So that's kind of one of the things that we've been waiting for from Quincy Ballard, is to see him use his 6'11" body or 7-foot body and physically dominate in the post. I mean, he should be getting close to 10 rebounds or more every single game. And this may be the first time that he's reached double digits in rebounds. So like I said, I just don't know what we're going to get from this team. And I know that people are getting frustrated with the fact that this has happened every single game now, that Mississippi State comes out and just barely beats a bad opponent and they get wiped off the floor by good teams. And like, they beat a couple of decent teams with Georgia Tech and with Utah, but we just don't know what this team's going to be. And look, this is a problem that Jans has had ever since he got here. He really does struggle a lot to get anything out of his portal players. I mean, this team this year has basically been built on the portal. The only two returning players that he has from last season's team is Josh Hubbard and Sean Jones. Those are the only two that return from last season's team. And therefore, the rest of this team has been built through the portal or through the incoming freshman class. And the freshmen, they're talented, but we still don't. I mean, it's asking a lot to just rely completely on a group of freshmen, especially in the way that college basketball works nowadays, because we don't have quite as many people making the jump straight to the NBA. So you're getting more veteran teams than we used to have, 10 years ago. And because of that, you can't really rely on freshmen to come in and just make an immediate impact. Yes, there are some outliers. We had the Fab Five back in the 90s. That was, that's a bit of an outlier. And then you had the Kentucky teams. But again, that was a different time in college basketball. Kentucky went and got freshmen that they expected to be one and dones. And that's how they operated their team. So asking a talented, highly regarded freshman class to come in and make an immediate impact is probably asking for a bit much at this point. So what is this team going to be? I don't know. I really don't. Look, this team, I think, is probably like a 5 to 7 win team in SEC play at this point, but I think they're more talented than that. I think they have the ability to play better than that. I think they have the ability to go out and win more games than that in SEC play, but they just can't figure out what they're going to do night in and night out. I mean, like I said, this is the issue that Chris Jans has when he's made his evaluations. Whenever he's brought portal players in, they haven't really panned out that well. There's been very few people that he's brought in through the portal that have really made a significant difference for Mississippi State ever since he got here. And the fact that we are relying so heavily on the portal this year as a problem. He's got to make better evaluations. Look, he doesn't have to necessarily go out and find somebody who can score 20 points a game and get 10 rebounds night in and night out. But he needs to be able to, if he's looking at a guy, is this a guy who can be a starter, play 30 minutes, give us, 8 to 12 points to complement what Josh Hubbard is. He found that with Jaden Epps. He's made a pretty good evaluation with him. Jaden Epps is averaging a little over 16 points a game. Maybe he might be at 17 points a game now. So he's doing a pretty good job. Of living up to the evaluation, but everybody else isn't. Quincy Ballard, this was the first time that he actually looked like a post presence, and we're 11 games into the season. You look at, like I said, Jabari McGee. He just went off last game against Utah. This game, he doesn't do anything. You have to understand what these players can give you night in and night out. You have to know if they can consistently do that, because if you can't get consistency from your players, you can't figure out your rotations. You can't figure out your lineups. You can't figure out how to attack a team because you don't know what you're going to get from folks. I mean, like I said, Makura, or however you pronounce his name, a great game last night. That's not always been the case. Like I said, I just don't know what this team is. I don't think Chris Jans knows what this team is either. So there's been a lot of frustration around Chris Jans this year because they have performed poorly, and I think there's probably gonna be a lot of people who are going to be calling for his job. That's not going to happen. That's just not going to happen, guys. They're not firing Chris Jans this year. They're not going to do that. He might flake himself into the hot seats. That could happen. It wouldn't surprise me in the least if he ends up, you know, if Mississippi State doesn't make the NCAA tournament, or if they don't even make the NIT, which is even the NIT looks like a long shot at this point. You probably are going into the 2026-2027 season with Chris Jans coaching for his job, and I never would have thought that after those first couple of years when he just made chicken salad out of what. So like I said, that's what he just did such an amazing job those first couple of years. He just now has been able to build the momentum. I mean, last year was a little bit of a disappointment because you had a team that looked like it was prepped to make a serious run in the SEC. They end up finishing like 10th or 11th in the SEC. They end up getting bounced in the first round again. And that's just kind of what the Chris Jans era has been. And it's fine for those first 2 years. But that third year probably should have been a little bit better. And this fourth year should be way better than what it is right now. And so he's got to improve. And hopefully next year is the year that he gets this stuff back together, because right now it's just not looking real good. So, all right, let's take a break from Mississippi State, because there's not a whole lot else to talk about. Let's talk about the college football playoff. It starts up this weekend. Let me get the games pulled up and get the lines, because I do want to at least talk about the lines just a little bit. I'm very curious to see what ends up happening with this year's college football playoff. The first round of games, there's two duds. Let's just be real honest. You've got James Madison and Oregon, who are playing at 6:30, and I do not know why they did the TV schedule the way that they did on these games. James Madison, Oregon are the late game. Look, I know you don't want to put James Madison, Oregon in the early game because it is in Oregon. And if you did them in the early game, they'd be playing like 9 o'clock in the morning local time. But you could have put them in the middle of the day. That would have been perfectly fine. But they are the final game of the first round. They start at 6:30 Central Time on Saturday night. This should be a romp. It's probably not going to be close. Look, I think James Madison is a good team, but they have only lost one game. The only game that they lost was to a Power 4 team, which I think was Louisville. But I don't expect this to be much of a game at all. I really don't. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I just don't see James Madison having the talent to keep up with Oregon for 4 quarters. Maybe they can make it a game for a half and kind of keep it close. Excuse me, but at some point, James Madison is just going to run away from them. That's just all there is to it. They're going to run away from them and put them away. The second game on Saturday, the middle game, that's Ole Miss and Tulane. Again, I expect this game to probably be a blowout. The only real intrigue that you have with Ole Miss and Tulane is this is a rematch from earlier in the year. Ole Miss ended up beating them, I think, 45-10 when they played them earlier this year, and it was on the road. So Ole Miss went to Tulane and won that game convincingly. But the only real intrigue that you have here is Lane Kiffin is not with the team anymore. Pete Golding will be coaching his first game as a head coach on a pretty big stage. So you just wonder if maybe that might play any factor. And look, I just don't think it will. The talent discrepancy is going to be just too wide. Ole Miss should win this game relatively easy. Maybe it's a little bit closer than it was last time. I think Ole Miss is like a 17.5-point favorite going into this game. I expect them to cover, and probably to cover relatively easily. Like I said, even with this being Golding's first game as the head coach, I just think the talent discrepancy is just too much, and there's no way that Tulane's going to be able to make up for that talent gap. I said this last week when I was talking about winners and losers for the college football playoffs. I think Ole Miss was a huge winner because of the fact that when SMU lost Cal, that sent the just strange ACC tiebreaker into effect, which sent Duke into the ACC championship game against Virginia. And when Duke ends up winning that, of the two decent teams, Virginia doesn't win that game, and therefore, a halfway decent team, Virginia could have given them a game with this being Pete Golding's first game. I don't know, maybe not, but like I said, once that happened and it sent James Madison into the college football playoff, it pushed Tulane up, and therefore they get into a slightly higher seed to play Ole Miss, and it's just look. I'm not one of those guys who thinks that the Power Five, the Group of Six or the Group of Five, shouldn't be involved in college football playoffs. If they don't have their own national championship, then they need to be involved. Now, we can talk about whether or not that's something they should do, and that's a completely separate conversation. But I'm not of the opinion that they need to leave the Group of Five, the Group of Six, whatever you want to call them, out of the college football playoff. I just don't think that they need to do that at this point. If they don't have their own national championship, then they need to be included in this. And will they compete? Probably not. But you never know. I mean, one of these days they could. I mean, I was really surprised that Boise State didn't put up more of a fight than they did last year. Like, Boise State was a really talented team with arguably the best player in the country, the player who probably should have been the Heisman Trophy winner in Ashton Jeanty. So, like I said, I would have. At some point, I think they will eventually be able to compete a little bit, but this is not the year. And I say that they should be able to compete at some point, but the struggle that Group of Five teams have is their best players are just going to get picked off. If you have a great year for a Group of Five team, you know that a Power Five team is probably, or a Power Four team is probably going to want to get you, and that's what ends up happening almost every single time when those guys have those standout years and really have just incredible seasons. Power Four teams come looking and say, "Hey, why don't you come join us?" And when they have a hole that they need to fill, and that is exactly what happens for all the Group of Five teams. Now, the two games that should be good. The early game, the 11 o'clock game on Saturday, is between 7 seed Texas A&M and 10 seed Miami. And I'll be honest, this one is probably the hardest game to figure out because I don't know how good either of these teams are. Obviously, both of these teams beat Notre Dame, the team that everybody was crying about not getting into the playoff at the beginning of the year. So they both have that really good win on their resume. But outside of that, they don't have a whole lot of good wins on their resume. The Texas A&M, I've pointed this out before, Texas A&M, before they played Texas, played every single team that they played was in the bottom half of the SEC standings. 7 of their 8 opponents were in the bottom half of the SEC standings before they played Texas. When they finally played Texas, they end up losing. And they couldn't really move the ball that well. They couldn't do a whole lot that well, so it wasn't all that surprising. Miami, their biggest issue is they played in the ACC, and I don't know how the ACC is not good, and I don't know how serious to take Miami. I just don't. Maybe they can get together, and maybe put up a decent performance against the Texas A&M Aggies on the road. I just don't know. Like this is the one that I just cannot get a really good grasp on. I think Texas A&M should probably win because this will be played in College Station. And so that's really the only thing that I have to go by. And that's the only really thing that I have to give me a whole lot of confidence in picking either of these teams. And so that's where I'm going with. I'm going to go with Texas A&M. I expect them to win probably probably around a touchdown. So we're looking at 38-31 type of game. Actually, that's probably high. Texas A&M is pretty good defensively. It's probably going to be more like 27-20 is where Texas A&M ends up winning this thing and moving on to play against Ohio State in the semifinal. The final game, and the game that is the one I think they got right in terms of the television time slot, Alabama and Oklahoma. These are the two most storied teams in the first round of the college football playoff. You have Alabama coming in as the 9 seed, the one that got everybody upset that says that they shouldn't be there. Maybe they should, maybe they shouldn't. Regardless, they're there. And you've got Oklahoma as the 8 seed. And this one's going to be fun because it's probably going to be just a sloppy game. It's probably going to be messy. It's probably going to have a lot of turnovers because Oklahoma, despite the fact that they just really struggle to score, I mean, they really have a hard time putting the ball in the end zone. I really expect them to drag Alabama down to their level in that regard, just kind of like they did in Tuscaloosa earlier this year. And I do wonder, can a team beat Alabama 2 times in the same season? I don't know. It's just such a hard thing to do. I mean, maybe they can, maybe they can't, but Alabama is the more talented team. If you look at, recruiting rankings, teams, player profiles, Alabama has more talent. They have the better quarterback, but Oklahoma just has a nasty defense, and they're playing at home, and it's really hard to figure out who's going to win this game. I'm probably going to go ahead and pick Alabama, even though I don't feel real comfortable doing it, just because I don't like that. Oklahoma just finds ways to win, and every time that they take the field, you're like, surely this team can figure out a way to score enough against that defense to beat them, and they almost never do. The only time that it's happened was when Ole Miss and Texas played them earlier this year. But every other time, Oklahoma just grinds opponents down, and they eventually run away with the game. And maybe they do that again against Alabama while they play at home. But like I said, if they don't, if Alabama doesn't win, I'll be very interested what happens to Kalen DeBoer. Obviously, he said he's turning down the Michigan job. You know, Alabama fans, I don't know that, they're happy to be back in the playoff, but they're still not happy about the fact that they lost 3 games. And, if they get bounced in the first round of the playoff, what does that say? Like, so we're in a very new era with all this. This is the second time that we've done this expanded college football playoff, and I just don't know how they'll end up responding to it. So, like I said, it'll be interesting to watch. All right, that's enough about sports. Let's move on to television. Last night on Prime Video, the debut of Fallout Season 2 premiered. I don't want to give any spoilers away, so I'm not going to go into like details about what happened in the show. I will say this: if you haven't seen Fallout, if you didn't catch it when it came out last April, if you didn't catch that first season, go check it out. It was one of the best shows of 2024. It really was. I had it as number 2 on my list of top shows for the year. I absolutely loved that first season. And so if you haven't seen it, go check it out. It's a really, really good show. The the premise is it's based off of the Fallout video games, and it basically is a post-apocalyptic television show where you have these people who live in these bunkers underground, these vaults as they're called, and that's one section of society. But the people who live up top, it's like the Wild Wild West, but with like really strange characters and people who are affected by the nuclear radiation that took place. And it's just got a great cast. I mean, Ella Purnell, if you haven't seen what Ella Purnell in anything that she's done, she was great in the first season of Yellow Jackets. She's incredible in this. She gave a great voice performance in the Netflix series Arcane. She's just a star that's waiting to happen, and this is probably going to continue to propel her career even more so than it is right now. I expect her to be just an absolute star by the time that this thing is over and see her career continue to blossom. It's got the great Walton Goggins in it. If you're not a Walton Goggins fan, I don't know how you're not. He is just absolutely marvelous every single time that he takes the screen. I love him in this. This is probably his biggest role. It's the closest that he's probably ever come to being the lead of a film or television show. And it's kind of a co-lead with him and Ella Purnell. And you got Aaron Moten's character as well, who is right there. But his storyline is a little bit lower down on the totem pole than what their story is. And we get, for the most part, this first episode of season 2 focused on those two, Ella Purnell and Walton Goggins. And despite the fact that they are so far apart in age range, their chemistry together is fantastic. They work really well together. And the dynamics they're giving on the screen in this so far here in the second season after this first episode is just wonderful. To get these two together and to get them bouncing off of each other, it was just absolutely magical to watch on the television screen last night. Like I said, really excited about this second season. The first episode was good. It's not as it wasn't the heights of season 2, but it is the first episode, and we're introducing new things in this second season. They're going to New Vegas, which is one of the Fallout video games. And one of the things I think that this show does really well is it decided not to just try to do a direct adaptation of one of the Fallout games. It's basically creating its own story inside of what the Fallout world is of these video games. So like I said, I think that's a really smart decision to not try to just completely recreate the game. Like I said, I've been incredibly impressed. This is done by Lisa Joy Nolan and Jonathan Nolan, who did Westworld. Obviously, Westworld was one of the best first seasons ever, and it fell off a cliff after that. So I was a little concerned coming into it because it is their stuff, but they seem to have kind of refound their magic from that first season of Westworld. Like I said, if you haven't watched it and you got a Prime Video subscription, and most people have a Amazon Prime subscription, so you get Prime Video with it. So go check it out. It's really good. Like I said, I'm really looking forward to what we get in the rest of season 2. Now, last thing I want to talk about before I sign off, I finished up a book that I'd heard a lot about yesterday. It's called The Will of the Many by James Islington. I'm pretty certain the S is silent. I'd heard a lot about it, but I wasn't real sure. I tried reading his first series of books, and I kind of got bogged down that first one and just wasn't a huge fan. I may end up going back to it after this. But The Will of the Many is really great. It's the premise basically is you have a young boy, well, not young, he's 17, but an older teen boy who has a mysterious past, and he's been orphaned, and he gets caught up in a greater scheme against what's called the hierarchy. And basically, the hierarchy is a corrupt government that rules with basically like a fascist power. And the premise of it, because it is a fantasy novel. And it's one of the more interesting premises that I've seen in a novel like this. Basically, everyone is assigned to a societal pyramid, and in this pyramid, the people who are at the bottom, the Octavi, they have to give 50% of their life force. They have to seed it to the level above them, the level above, and the people who are above them have to seed 50% of their life force. So while they're getting more, the you you have to keep passing it up, passing it up, passing it further to where at the very top of the pyramid, the people who are at the very top, they're the strongest, but it takes all of the people underneath them to provide them their power. And this is called seeding their will. And the will and those who are at the top have these great magical powers to run these machines and to do all these, just perform these magnificent feats of strength. And it's kind of a complex system, and it's a little bit hard to grasp. And I think probably the one criticism I would have of the book, I don't know that they explain that just real well at the beginning to give you a really good idea of how all this works. But once you kind of figure it out, it works really well. There's a lot of imagery and language that comes from like the ancient Greeks and the Egyptians. And so when I'm picturing this in my mind, when I'm reading it, you get a lot of those. They talk about tunics and togas and things like that. So it also feels like it takes place kind of in that Mediterranean area of the world. Like I said, obviously this is a made up world, but that's kind of what you picture when you think of what he's describing in this world that he's built. Is like it's the Mediterranean area, the Greek, the Egyptian area. That part of our world is kind of what it feels like when he's describing it. But what makes this book so great is, without giving anything away, for like 95% of the book, you think it's kind of a standard, corrupt government fighting against a fascist power. And that's what the book is supposed to be about. But then at the very end, there's a really big twist, and it's going to launch the second book into something completely different. The second book, The Strength of the Few, came out about a month ago, so I'll be starting it here soon. I'm looking forward to it because, like I said, the way it ends just really makes you just really excited about what is going to come in the second book. Like I said, I don't want to give anything away. So if you haven't read it, I would highly recommend checking it out. I was enjoying it throughout the course of the entirety, but once we got to the end, really those like last few chapters are just absolutely astounding and amazing. And he does just an incredible job of taking a really solid story and just turning it into something just absolutely incredible there at the end, and making it into something completely different that isn't the typical fantasy stereotype type story going into the second book. So, all right, guys, I appreciate you tuning in. I'm hoping that my recording will upload to my podcast catcher. If not, then I just gave a live performance here on TikTok. So I guess that's all that we'll go with. So, all right, guys, appreciate all that you have done. And until next time, I will talk to you later.